Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Archint. As you can see, I have with me Dr. Bharat Karnad. After a very popular demand back, let me say that to you, sir. Uh, a lot of the Dev Talks viewers have been wanting to hear you back on a couple of different subjects, and one of them is this whole reshaping of this world order. And if I may just give a minute, is that the pandemic and now the Russia-Ukraine war has brought the world into a place where I think things are going to change. We see that happening in front of us, differential power structures coming up, differential multilateral organizations like the BRICS and stuff like that coming up in some sort of a way as an opposition to the West. The Western alliance seems to be a little dilly-dallying in their particular thing. Of course, the Russians are currently in a very precarious position as far as the military is concerned. Uh, they seem to have achieved what they wanted to achieve in terms of breaking up the economic strength of the West. How do you see this whole thing, whole amalgamation with a little bit of tinge of history going forward, sir? What's happening in the world?
Now, look, this pretty much marks the end of what you might say a European worldview, which is really, in a sense, adopted by the US as the American worldview once the United Kingdom demitted its stature as the dominant power in the world, which was around the last fin de siècle, which was in 1900s, when literally the US handed over the cares of the world, was handed over the cares of the world by London and say, okay, look, we are not going to be able to manage this. You hand over, here's the power to rule the world. From Pax Britannica, it then becomes Pax Americana. So this is what happened. Now, in fast forward another 100 years, you're in the next fin de siècle. Fin de siècle means the end of century. And we are in that process still, where the new world is emerging without the contours being entirely definite about what the world would be like, say, 20 years hence. Well, it takes time for a certain system and a certain global order to gel, to stabilize. And now we are, I think, in that time and process of the new system emerging and stabilizing. Now, what's the new system? As far as I can make out, the post-World War II system, which was an American-dominated system. As I told you, from the 1900s, early 1900s onward, it was American dominance that came through. With the Second World War, the United States were virtually crowned as a dominant power. Except that Russia now came in as a competitor and rival, as a great land power, and you had then therefore the great tussle between the maritime power, the US, and the great land continental power, Russia. By Soviet Union, I mean, which again stretched, which is Eurasian in substance and content, stretching all the way from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok, spanning the entire continent, and quite extraordinary in its both its depth, strategic depth, and the kind of resources it had. It's the most completely endowed country, in a sense, like America. Except, unlike America, it does not have threats, land threats. It does in terms of potential threats from China. Being a land power, if you have land contiguity, territorial contiguity with another rising power, it automatically becomes a threat. So China is a rival, a threat, and a competitor, and also a collaborator in trying to keep the offshore power, which is the United States, in its place. So that's the general play of things. And so the new order, as I see it, is going to be less ideological. This post-World War II order was ideological. Whether it was actually ideological is not the point. But the raison d'etre was always the free countries, the free, democracies and free countries of the world, the free world versus the communist world, right? The communist bloc. With India and the non-aligned bloc trying to be the system balancer and so on. It was a brilliant, realpolitik device that Nehru thought of, rather than joining one or the other power, as Pakistan did to its dismay, and discovered that really the alliance was not going to be there for Pakistanis. Pakistanis were there for the alliance. That's the kind of the obvious balance of interests that worked against Pakistan. And good for us that we didn't ally into that. We got to become a system balancer, and we used that very well to it was a considerable success. Nehru managed to do that, and I think it's a very good thing. Now now, what is the larger scheme of things that's emerging? One of the things is there's no ideology anymore. Look at the kind of coalitions that are surfacing around us, where India is very much a partner. There's no ideological cement binding you. We are just, I mean, every country is allying, partnering, having short term, medium term, long term, whatever, partnerships with very disparate states with whom we have nothing in common except maybe the geostrategic interest to do this or that, maybe geo-economic interest. However it is you define the thing, these are atomized notions of self-interest then that are driving these partnerships. So there's no clear, cohesive coalitions or alliances emerging anywhere. All of them are there driven by self-interest. Once that becomes the motive force, self-interest, it's always been the case, except it was never acknowledged, and that's very important. When you don't acknowledge the driving force as being self-interest, except in some vague sense, well, yeah, our interest is served by this alliance or that alliance, but then you have to have the patina of ideology of democracies, a concert of democracies or whatever. That's really a rationale, a justification. But when countries go into a partnership with clearly nothing in mind except the immediate self-interest, that's a new thing in some ways. I mean, you're getting back into a world where everybody's warring against everybody else. Is the perfect Lockean, Thomas Locke's notion of a dog-eat-dog world, where nobody has any scruples. There's nothing, an overarching philosophy that binds, that makes for a global order. There's no such thing. And the only thing that one can imagine is a rival to, in a cohesive sense, is a rival to the still Western notion of a concert of democracies, etc., which how something like our quadrilateral was, conceived, and now the AUKUS has been conceived by ironically, the old Anglo-Saxon powers who rule the world. So you have this kind of mix and match of interests that make for a very troubling and troubled world, because everybody's out to drive the partnership to their advantage, which is fair enough, except earlier the smaller powers and smaller partners in an alliance knew their place. In NATO, they still do. Europeans, Western European countries still defer to the United States because they don't want to, not because they're not capable, but because they don't want to spend the money for their own defense. And they rather rely on the US to go beggar itself by trying to defend the US, the NATO interests in Europe, than spend the money that, that's the reason why Trump said NATO is useless, pull your weight, or we're going to pull out, right? And the idea is that each NATO member spends at least 2 to 3% of GDP on defense, in coalition defense, in NATO alliance defense. And so when they didn't do it, Trump said, okay, I'm going to get out because we can't bear your weight and also look after our own interests, security interests, etc. Now they're sobered up, but not enough. And that's why you again find that the idea of resupplying Ukraine to keep them afloat as far as fighting element goes vis-a-vis Russia is not working that well. In the sense that the Germans, for instance, have something that it's called Ringtausch in German, which basically means ring fencing in Russia. And what is their Ringtausch policy? It just announced a few days back. What is their policy? The policy is that, well, we'll supply newest armaments to Slovenia, Greece, and all these peripheral countries, who in turn will pass on the old gear to Ukraine. Now, how does that help? Well, but this is precisely the model that the Pakistanis used to modernize the army. When the Afghanistan imbroglio began, the idea was that they were going to arm the Taliban, except the Pakistan army kept all the best stuff, the Armalite AR-15s, all the assault weapons, the very light compact, the compact ground to air missiles, and so on and so forth, for themselves, and gave their old stuff onto the Taliban. So this is the same thing now being repeated by NATO partners vis-a-vis Ukraine. Now, I'm not sure how old armaments are going to help Ukraine fight Russia, when the fact is they're doing rather well with what they have in terms of improvisational strategy and tactics, which what I think the Russians did not expect. They thought just a show of force, just the first tank army coming in on a familiar axis into Kiev and threatening Kherson and so on would be enough for the Zelensky government to throw up their hands and say, okay, fine, we give up. Yeah, because they had not reckoned with the new Ukraine under Zelensky. They thought that just a show of force would be enough. Now, they did not prepare for a war. There's a difference between attempting a show of force and actually going to war. The Russians simply didn't expect it. Nobody did, by the way. To be fair to nobody did, and so instead you suddenly have in Ukraine that is willing to fight back and has great improvisational skills. It is using the Russian is penetrated the Russian command controls through cyber tactics, through cyber penetration, creating havoc everywhere. With what they have, they're able to, and because they also speak Russian, they can interject themselves and complicate the Russian command control because they speak the same Russian language. So you get into the communications loop and start issuing idiotic orders to who don't realize that there's no integrity left in the communications net, battlefield net. So if you're getting very contrasting orders, the units are going all over the place. They don't know what to do, because this is the kind of warfare that they began. Now they're being helped by the Western countries to stabilize that and keep the Russian forces unbalanced. Then the Russians said, okay, you're going to fly, you want to fight us? Okay, we'll bring in the real heavy duty generals from Syria and so on, who's the new guy they've appointed, Putin has appointed commander-in-chief, who's known essentially as a butcher. He doesn't care. He'll just come in and wipe out the entire population. End of the story. There's no war, there's no opposition, there's nothing. Now, that's more difficult to do in Ukraine because, you actually have a NATO presence in Poland, surrounding Belarusia, which is again a partner. Yeah. So, but there's NATO forces in the Black Sea coming into the Dardanelles. You cannot do that anymore. So the lightning strike notion that you had, you'll suddenly, you'll capture a land bridge and then declare a peace. You didn't even do that. Having captured Kherson, Putin said, okay, now we want some more. Are Baba, you had your land bridge. You had Crimea. You should have said, okay, fine. As a goodwill gesture, I'll give back Kherson and let's sit down and formalize this thing. In any case, this is Russian-speaking peoples, and we'll give whatever small conditions you might insist on of ethnic Ukrainians or whatever. Because what's the difference between Russia and the Ukrainians? One is religion. The Ukrainians are Roman Catholic, while they are Russian Orthodox, Russian-speaking. So, okay, you can make some arrangements of, live and let live sort of an arrangements, and everything would have been fine. Russia would have got the land bridge, they'd have had Crimea, they'd then be in a position to control the Black Sea. Now, what has happened is, with Ukraine firming up and realizing that they can push the Russians around, they're not now willing to talk. Even though
Yes.
Americans are pushing them, they're not willing to talk to Russia. Why? Because they see the advantage they have now in keeping fighting.
Hmm.
If you keep up fighting, then there is a greater stake, the NATO stake and US stake in the fight. It's a fight that the Russians are less able to sustain economically. So they are being pushed into the Chinese embrace, as it were. The Russians don't want it. They realize the Chinese embrace might be worst thing that can happen to Russian ambitions. But what does Putin do?
What do you have? Hmm.
So this is the kind of dilemmas that are being faced. And by the way, the dilemma is turn it around. What can NATO do? NATO doesn't
Nothing.
want, Americans don't want their boots on the ground. As I've always said in my first post on the blog, I said the Americans will fight for Ukraine to the last Ukrainian. They're not,
Sad.
or to the last Pakistani when in Afghanistan, or to the
Mhm.
last Afghan. Not Americans. Americans pull out. As soon as things get hot, they have no stamina for war. Americans are the worst. That's why I've said they're most unreliable allies and partners. One country you cannot depend on or rely on is the United States. They'll give you all the armaments you want, but armaments without boots on the ground essentially means that you do all the fighting, which is fine, but then at least do not lead the country that are your partners to believe that you'll come to the rescue, which is what you promised the Karzai government and the Abdul Ghani government, and then you left them high and dry. This is what you promised the South Vietnamese government, then you left it high and dry. You just decamped, ran away from the field. So the Americans are not great fighters. I mean, Hollywood and all, we are sort of we are consumers of Hollywood nonsense. What is it? What I call fantastical imagery of that the Hollywood film industry comes up with, television industry comes up with, all the special forces and they're nothing. They can't fight for nuts. They don't have the stamina to fight. I mean, as you perhaps are aware, there's the whatever periodic competitions in very difficult terrain between the elite special forces of the world. Perhaps you're aware of that. And some years back, there was the Maratha Light Infantry Special Force, that went to the Kalamari Desert in South Africa. What happened? And the Americans have sent the Delta, the Rangers, the two units, you see, and all of them were beaten by the MLI, whose emergency K rations were, dry nuts and some chapati or
Good and
something.
chana.
Yeah, and they went and captured, and the Rangers and the all these special forces that are all beefed up and having all kinds of weird stuff and geared up for everything except actually fighting. They got beaten by the MLI, Maratha Light Infantry. So it shows that you do not want to come up against a Gurkha, close quarter fighting. You might be 6 feet tall and carry all kinds of stuff. You do not want to come up against the Gurkhas, which is what British discovered. Or you do not want to come up against the Marathas fighting. This is the real thing. So the point to make is, yes, if you're going to fight to the last native of the country that you promised to protect and whose security you want to beef up, then essentially it means you're leaving that particular country to its own devices. It means that. And that's what I think the countries of the world are beginning to realize,
Realize. Hmm.
including Japan, including South Korea, because now they are talking nuclear weapons, which is why North Korea is now preparing for the next thermonuclear test. And they have just fired an ICBM in a high apogee launch which basically means if you were to lower the apogee, you go to continental distances to take out CONUS targets, continental
Correct.
United States targets. So this is the kind of stuff. And when North Korea has got all this, Japan saying, "What the heck, yeah? I mean, we can make a nuclear
Better.
weapon in 10 days' time. 10 days' time. That's all it's going to take them, by the way. And they have enough fissile material for 1,000 nuclear weapons warheads. And which what I predicted will happen in my book, 2008 book, India's Nuclear Policy, where in my first chapter, I said this is how the Asian landscape is going to work out. Exactly what's happening now. So, you know, because you have to look distantly to see how things are going to shape out. Not say, okay, what's going to be beyond our noses tomorrow. That's not strategy. That's tactics. Very different things. And that's why my pet peeve against the Indian government is that we do not think strategically. We think at all times tactically. The latest problem on the border, latest issue to be resolved, not what's going to be 50 years hence, which is what the Chinese do brilliantly. You must admit, and I admit it, because they are, and I've always said in my books, I said, if we don't have the brains, the strategic brains, and the wherewithal, intellectual wherewithal to think strategic, then do the next best thing: emulate the Chinese. Let them do the thinking. You may emulate whatever it is they do, because they've done it brilliantly. They've played the Americans to completely finish off the Americans in the economic sense. They've destroyed American industry. The consumer articles, all the stuff that it keeps supplying to America, has been completely destroyed in America, right? I mean, you might think it's a small thing, all the toys and all the wretched things that are made of no consequence. But all the clothes, all the light consumer items that we all consume, Haier, Huawei, all these companies are supplying just no flooding the Western markets and cheaply. So that once you get hooked onto it's like and I've always said somewhere, it's like the whole reason for the opium wars of the 1840s, 1850s, where the British grew opium in Bihar and then shipped it to China to keep the Chinese in bondage. Once you, once you first you hook them onto the opium, then once you had the entire embankment in Shanghai and the whole coast then hooked onto Chinese, all the people were rendered useless. They were comatose most of the time. There were, as you know, opium dens in most
Yeah.
Chinese cities of that era. And that was the kind of virtual dissolution of a society that was there. That was attempted by the British, who did it brilliantly. They just first hooked the Chinese onto opium, then opened up all of China on the basis that we can't sell opium, and that's restricting free trade, and I'm going to therefore fight you. They finished off the Chinese. They made forced entry. Stephen Hay, who was Secretary of State in the US, the open gate policy was adopted by all the Western powers then to jump all in. They all came in after the British Opium War opened up Chinese market with all their things. Now, all that is happening in reverse is that the Chinese are using precisely the same tactics to now flood the American and Western
Western
markets,
market.
taking over economically. Brilliant. This is strategic brilliance of the highest order. That's what I've said. If we don't have it, let's emulate the Chinese. We have cheap labor. We should have done it. We never did it because you keep making concessions. Instead of using your market, what do you have most? You have the market. If you do not give access to the market, then it becomes difficult even for China right now. What's the one thing why Xi Jinping is holding back? Is the Indian market. Yes, he has lost out. Huawei has lost out. Is being kept out. That's how how well they have penetrated the Indian market, as they have done every other market. It's not India alone. It's Europe. That's why everybody's sort of having the head in the hand, saying, "How do we get out of the, shall we say, the shackles of dependence on the Chinese?" That's the big problem right now for everybody. And we very much are part of it. But we seem not to have an idea as how to do it. You had the G20 meeting in Bali right now, where Xi, by the way, attended, as did Narendra Modi. And Xi did not. I mean, we have built up G20 as where we are going to take up the chairmanship, whatever it is, as a big thing for India. The fact is that Xi would not move. He knows his position in the world and China's position in the world. And it was he who admonished Justin Trudeau. I don't know whether you saw that little snippet. He literally wagged his finger and said, "Don't do it again." Wherein they were talking about, controls through the communications, control communications, or controlling access to communications and so on, that they were talking about. And then she said that was, literally said, "Don't do it," or else. And Justin Trudeau, then meekly said yes and went away. This is how you do it. You stand tall and let people come in to talk to you. You don't go running around to people. He set himself, she set himself up, and everybody, all the other leaders, including Biden, came there to speak to him. Biden and where they had a separate one-on-one. But that's precisely what the Chinese are very good at. They understand that imagery should really fit your position, your status. You shouldn't be seen to be going after something. Let the world see that everybody else is coming to you. That's the thing about face in the Orient, which we are part of the Orient in a way, simply because we are inscrutable to most people. But the Chinese are even more inscrutable, and they believe in heightening that inscrutability, because no one can make out what the heck they're doing or what they're planning, and etc., etc. Right? They're very good at it. They use their language very well. Their language skills are so good. They always talk Chinese, as we have begun to do. As Modi, I must say, to our advantage, is now beginning to speak in Hindi. No matter what happens, he speaks in Hindi, which is an absolute necessity. Because we pride ourselves in speaking in English, and we actually speak better English than most Americans and most Europeans, honestly, simply because we have studied English. As Krishna Menon was once asked when he gave the longest speech in the United Nations, in the UNGA, General Assembly, everybody came up and congratulated him. He said, "Why are you surprised?" The British, in a condescending fashion, came up to Krishna Menon and said, "Well, you speak very well." He says, "Yeah, the difference is we study English, you merely learn it. So that's the difference. When you study it, you're grammatically more, you're better, you are far better at the lexical logic and so on and so forth."
And the formation.
Yeah, not just that, just marshalling things. And the Indians are good at it. So we adapt ourselves well. And we adapted ourselves very well to the English thing, except it doesn't help in diplomacy. And therefore, it's not as Zhou Enlai did not understand English. He understood English very well. But he refused to speak to Nehru in English, who spoke in English. Now, the problem here was, for India, was way back in 1953 when they first met, Zhou Enlai and Nehru. Zhou Enlai had come here and Nehru met him. And Nehru flaunted his Harrowian English, upper class Englishman, aristocrat, and so on. And Zhou Enlai merely responded to everything that Nehru said in Mandarin. Now, there was a chap called V.V. Paranjape, I think, Ambassador Paranjape, who was the interpreter. And he was interpreting Zhou Enlai to Nehru. And the Chinese had their own interpreter just interpreting in English, which was really notional because Zhou Enlai understood English perfectly well. So when Paranjape did not adequately interpret something that he wanted conveyed to Nehru, he corrected Paranjape and said, no, that's not what I said. He was hearing what he was, the interpretation, that the spin that Paranjape was giving. After all, interpreter is ultimately, you can give a spin if you are the interpreter, if the other guy doesn't know what it is you're saying, right? That becomes, that's why there are two record keeping systems.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, Zhou Enlai quickly stepped in and told Nehru, no, this is not what I said. I said this. So, language is a tool of diplomacy. And therefore, I'm very glad that Prime Minister Modi is beginning to use, has used language, because now everybody has to now have Hindi section in their
Interpreter.
foreign office. People
Mm.
who can speak Hindi. Because if you do not pick up on the nuance, you cannot understand what their thinking is, what the policy is, cannot understand what how to make sense of what you're saying. Every foreign office then is on the back foot. Where Modi goes on in his Hindi and with Sanskritized Hindi and this, that, and the other, and the other people are then left, and then Modi can always say, "I didn't mean that." In the one-on-ones when they get to English, assuming they get to English, I don't know. He can always say, "No, that's not what I said." In Hindi, this is what I said, and that's then this is what the Chinese do all the time. They keep correcting the aid memoirs that come up, the record of conversations between leaders, invariably hundreds of corrections. Even though the interpreter at the time might have been very correctly, interpreted what he said, by the time the records come up for verification, you have to cross sign and so on. It's completely changed. Meaning, you get a second chance at changing the historical record. See this? How important it is? Then, when the other guy refers to the conversation we had in May 1953, they say, "What record?" Here's the record. And that's what we are hewing to, conforming to. And our record might be completely different of what Nehru might have said. Similarly, this happens all the time. Even now, the commanders meet in the 14 Corps commanders when they meet with the PLA counterpart. They pull the same trick all the time. You know, they say we haven't broken any laws and understandings we have had. We say you have broken agreements, border agreements, the what's that? Peace and tranquility agreements. We had various agreement signs.
Mid 1913.
We haven't done it because the what was said doesn't match. They may have matched exactly when they were speaking, but by the time the records were made of the conversations from the Chinese side, they differed from what was actually said. So the Chinese said, "No, we haven't done. Where's the record? Here's our record." Brilliant. Language is a brilliant tool. Anyway, we are getting away from it. The point about
Yeah.
the new global order is that each country then is in a coalition setup, in an alliance setup, in a partnership setup, purely to pursue very narrow national interests, which what I always said we should do. For 30 years, I've been saying we are spread ourselves so thin. We are for universal disarmament. We are for this. We are for that. And then we are all for morality. Arey Baba, what has morality to do with international relations? Right? Morality is the last thing that you should bring up when talking about national interest and international affairs or interstate affairs. So this is what we seem not to have understood, or at least the problem is that we shy away from it. We accept some things that say the Americans say by way of you know well, think of the next steps in strategic partnership, NSSP, that was during the Vajpayee time. They promised us advanced military technology. Now tell me, in the DTTE, Defense Technology and Trade Initiative, if you recall, have we done anything? What are the new technologies where they've helped collaboration? Trump actually stopped collaboration on
Yeah.
the making of jet engines. He stopped it, terminated it, because Pentagon said, "Look, if you give them jet engines, that's the end of our market. The end of GE 404s and 414s and 4112s and all that shit. You know, they may make an airframe, they don't have an aero engine, a jet turbine engine. If you give them the technology and we help them build it, they'll not. We lose whole market." Strategic decision on Trump's part. He's terminated it. So, what exactly has DTTE done for 20 years now? Over 20 years. produce nothing. We just talk. Oh, you'll get. All they're saying is, okay, buy. All we have ended up doing, therefore, is buy more C-17s, more C-130s, transport aircraft, which really makes the U.S. industry, defense industry, very happy. These are high-value items. Or you buy P8Is, the
Orion,
petrol,
maritime patrol.
yes, for maritime MR aircraft, you know, and again, not with the original suites, avionics suite, as perhaps you're aware. We've got derated,
That the
electronics.
Americans always do, sir. I mean,
This
it's
is what they do. And by the way, Russians also do it. To be fair, Russians also do it, but they do it to this extent.
they
Russians
give
will
you
give
the second best level technology.
not yeah. Americans definitely second best, while Russians will give you 20% off the main.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? 20-30% off the main. Americans will simply not give you except unless it's very old, like F-16. They'll be happy to give you F-16. Are Baba, what will we do with the F-16? And yet there are people in the Air Force who will argue why F-16 is a great upgrade thing. Are now, if you have if we are like I've always said, we are like the fool who is very quickly separated from his money, right? In defense matter, we seem to be
Mm,
playing the fool, where someone says, "Okay, this is this that, where this is," one of those people who simply don't understand technology, have no grasp of it, and they mistake, in some sense, our defense services are so much to blame for this kind of attitude, because they are the professional advisors to the government. For God's sake, they should have the country's interest in mind when they go for short-term solutions. You import things here, import things there, do this, do that, and everybody likes 42 Squadron, Air Force, God knows what ships. I mean, think long term. That's why I have said, and that's why I've been advocating again for decades now. Since my last book, 2018, Staggering Forward, wherein I argued for first use nuclear doctrine. Why first use? Because this is how Pakistanis have stymied India. That's how North Koreans have stymied America and everybody else. That's why had Ukraine held on to the nuclear weapons, they would have stymied any Russian ambitions on Crimea or anything else, right? Because you don't want to get into the even the remotest prospects or possibilities of a nuclear exchange.
mm.
So there you have immediate certifiable insurance. And which is what we did not understand. We had a chance, for instance, it's there in my big fat book, Nuclear Weapons, Indian Security, when I first detailed the Indo-Israeli mission to take out Kahuta. We did not do it. Last minute, it was cancelled by Indira Gandhi.
Yeah.
India had to do nothing. India had to merely give passage to the Israeli Air Force strike aircraft, the F-16 complement, with a CAP, Combat Air Patrol, F-15s coming in from over the sea into Jamnagar, refueling, resting the pilots, uploading specialist ordnance to penetrate the underground Kahuta weapons complex and so on. And they're making an open aerial thing into Udhampur, where they'll refuel the last time with a mix of drop tanks. The ordnance was there, and then they bomb Kahuta. A series of bombing runs. The F-16s coming in. I don't know how many there were of F-16s, and the cap F-15s, and they bomb and egress towards Haifa. End. We're not going to loiter there. Bomb, egress out. The next wave comes in, bomb, egress out. And we had to do nothing except stage them. And Indira Gandhi got cold feet. Why? Because people like Subramaniam actually advised Indira Gandhi, no, the Pakistanis will attack our Trombay, this, that, without understanding. And this is what I addressed in my Nuclear Weapons Indian Security book, without understanding that the Calandria at Trombay, the complex that has the reactors, we have other reactors that are not as visible, but the main reactor there the Cyrus reactor, has a dome which cannot be penetrated easily, and the Pakistanis did not have the ordnance for it.
They still don't, sir.
They still don't have it. So and but people here get easily spooked. They don't want to do. They want to take risk at all. They got frightened. I mean, Polymera, who was the Air Force chief at the time, actually told us that we had the Pakistani Air Force communication. They had broken through. They were in the loop, and they're hearing the Pakistani F-16 pilots saying, "Sir, we should go now to take out Trombay," because that's how close it was. Because they knew they could do nothing against the Israeli attack, had we attacked. Meaning the Israelis doing all the attacking, we merely staging the damn thing. Staging means what? Just helping them refuel, upload the ordnance. I mean, we don't even let other people do our work. Now, had Pakistan not been a nuclear weapons power, wouldn't our life have been much better? Right? And just a year before, in 1981, they'd taken out Osirak. So these were specialist pilots and specialist Air Force aggressor squadrons coming in now to take out Kahuta. And we didn't let them. And who told me that? My source was General Aaron Yariv. When I had gone to cover the Lebanon War, 1982, he was living in the kibbutz. I was in the, was that the kibbutz next to the Lebanon border, Ilyat Shimona, I think, something like that. And he was called up on reserve duty. A man who was nearly 80 years old. He was Major General Aaron Yariv, and I read Moshe Dayan's 1956 campaign, Sinai campaign diaries. So I knew that was, in breakfast, I got there early in the night. I go for breakfast and look at, I see Aaron Yariv. I said, wow. And he says reserve duty, Major General, but reserve duty. 8 years old, called up for duty. And he, because there's such a small country, there's such small margins of error, Israel cannot take chances. That's why they're so on the ball all the time. And Aaron Yariv, I went up to General, I said, General Aaron Yariv, he looked up, yes, he has a very sweet voice. So I introduced myself, and he says, "Oh, you're Indian, I'm so nice to sit down, sit down." And he tells me all this, that we had everything planned for this campaign. We had everything planned. We had, Indira Gandhi was on board. Everything was good. Everything great. And then last minute, she gets cold feet.
Yeah.
Just, we were out. And he said that many of us were opposed to it. He said, if, we were so upset by this rejection at the very last moment, because they are fighters, they'll go in and take out, once they make their mission as their main aim, they'll do whatever. That's why Pervez Musharraf was so frightened to death that Israelis would mount a solo operation from the west into Kahuta and take out the Kahuta complex. Because they, by the way, I don't know whether you know this, but Pakistani government very seriously made approaches to Israel. Please don't, bomb anything. We don't mean any ill. We'll never give our weapons to any Arab. It is the wrong thing for anybody to claim that Arab monies, even if they did finance a bomb project, usually with the Chinese, paying the Chinese to give all the technical details and material and expertise and so on. We will not do anything. Please don't hit us. And the Israeli said, fine, okay, we will not do anything. And they came back getting some kind of an assurance that Israelis won't hit. But that assurance was not cement, as far as I know. It was not any agreement or anything. Yeah, it was just an understanding. But they went on bended knee to Israel. Please don't do it. Because they're expecting that they're going to hit again during Pervez Musharraf's time. Pervez Musharraf immediately sent off some people to Tel Aviv saying, please, please don't do it. And they got assurances that they will not pass on. They said, look, we have our intelligence. If we find you can, communicating any kind of nuclear knowledge, any missile knowledge to Iran or to any of the Arab countries in real time. Now they have made accord, the Abrahamic Abrahamic Accords are there now. That's a very different. That's what I mean by another thing. It's a perfect instance of supposedly countries with clashing interests coming together.
Long-term strategic thought.
Yeah,
Hmm.
long-term strategic. That's the point about what I've been saying about narrow interests dictating long-term alliance structuring. How long-term we don't know. How effective we don't know. The fact is, someone signed that accord, not the Abrahamic Accords or whatever the damn thing is. They were signed in
Abraham.
Washington. Yeah. So this is the sort of thing you're getting into. Now, that's why my point is that we have to be equally nimble strategically and intellectually. First of all, intellectually, even understand what it means. But we seem not to, and then we end up, shall we say, fooling ourselves into believing that we are too important in the world. We are this, we are that, we are Vishwaguru or whatever. Vishwaguru is fine. I mean, you can become a Vishwaguru, but also have hard force, no, and take your interest seriously. Do stuff. It's all very well to beat up on Pakistan. Why don't you stand up to China? I've always said Pakistan, I've always argued, is a very good thing Pakistan happened to us. And I've written in my books that if Pakistan had not been there, we'd have had to invent it. Why? Because geopolitically it becomes a cordon sanitaire. It's a buffer state. Because I saw, in coming to this conclusion, I saw that the radical Islam is coming in from the West, from the Arab and all these things. It's going to infuse the Pakistani society, as happened. I predicted it. And this I wrote, I think, 1994, in my first book, Future Imperiled, India's Security in the 1990s and Beyond. I think in that book. And then in subsequent books, I dilate on it. So this is the kind of stuff. If we just change our perspective, turn it around and say, hey, it's good to have Pakistan there as a buffer state against radical Islam, against those kinds of influences coming into the Indian society. Right? You get a very different perspective. Then we can say to them, as I've been advocating, one thing we should do, how do you build up confidence and security, see confidence and security building measures? We talk all these, ridiculous things without understanding what they actually mean. How do you really inspire confidence in a proto-adversary? Right? Okay. First of all, I said unilaterally do two things. Unilaterally. One is remove all your nuclear war-headed missiles from the western border. Completely, unilaterally. Announce it to the world. We have removed all our missiles. Secondly, I said demobilize the three strike corps into one, rationalize it into one strike corps, one armored mechanized corps for Pakistani contingencies. That's it. That's all you need. Get the two strike corps that have become redundant now, the manpower and the material, whatever can be used from the desert, to have three strike corps for the mountains, offensive strike corps for the mountains. Which is what I've been saying. And then re-equip these armored formations with light tanks, 25 tonners, 30 tonners, not MBT 60-ton monsters, which you can keep in that composite one corps that you have left for the western border. Once you do that, what will happen? Even the dunderheads, assuming, and then Pakistan Army I have great respect for. I've interacted with generals from Pakistan. I've been there a number of times. I've addressed military audiences there, and they understand. I said, yeah, I mean, how do you even conceive of a nuclear exchange with India? Because exchange ratio simply, at the bottom, a professional army is one that realizes its limitations. That's the ultimate definition of professionalism, that you know your constraints and your limitations. And by that reckoning, the Pakistan Army does. And therefore, I've said, you do that, and then you create a new order in the subcontinent. Because what will the Pakistanis do with the Pakistan Army? They need an India threat. Once the people see, and we announce it to the world, we are going to denuclearize our border, we are going to demobilize our strike formations, then what's the argument that Pakistani army is going to have to their own people as to why their they take a bulk of the budget every year. What will they do? Right? They'll be in difficult situation. That's why I've said put them in a difficult situation against their own people. Now they have built up this hawa of India menace, unfinished business of partition and all this, that, and the other. They keep playing this nonsense for 70 years, and they keep the people up in, agog with this kind of nonsense, and we feed it with our own attitudes. But if you now switch, which you need to do because we don't have those kinds of resources to have fully manned two front kind of nonsense that people here talk about. And I keep telling the military brass, why do you talk this two front nonsense? Really? You really think you can fight a two front war? Well, you can fight, but not very adequately. You're going to lose on both fronts. So isn't it better that you prepare to fight the larger, more potent adversary? Which the case I've been making for years. Prepare to fight the more powerful adversary, the lesser adversary is taken care of automatically. If you build up to deal with China, you automatically have all the wherewithal and the manpower and everything resources to shrug off Pakistan. This simple logic we don't understand. And yet our entire force structure is on Pakistan. Now we are running around after Galwan, we have to have longer range, but we don't have any long range. The Air Force still doesn't have a strategic bomber. We don't have, entire structure is short-legged, for short-legged operations, short duration operations. The Chinese can fight you for 3 years. Their stockpiles are for 3 years. Your stockpile is whatever it is. I won't say for obvious reasons, but very meager. The only consolation you have vis-a-vis Pakistan is you can beat up on it because theirs is even less. Well, let's go to 65 war. So K.S. Subramaniam was the Joint Secretary, JIC, Joint Intelligence Committee Chairman, as Joint Secretary. And he has written somewhere that we were down to 10 days of supply and stock at intense rates of fire. Right? The Pakistanis were down to 7 days, which means we had 3 days edge. We could have, forced advantage. We didn't do that. It's not a bad thing. I argue it's not a bad thing. Because had we done it, Pakistan would have collapsed. Had we taken Lahore, let's say. And by the way, this is an argument I had with General Harbaksh Singh, the late great General Harbaksh Singh, the tremendous commander, Harbaksh, who, with a single personal action of his, firmed up the front on Tagla Ridge in the 62 war. He was appointed commander, 4 Corps, with a wretched BM call, fighting pulmonary something or the other, lying in a bed, in a Delhi bed, and still commanding the forces from a sick bed. Such idiocy. And yet he is appointed 4 Corps. He helicopters into Thagla Ridge, where his regiment, one Sikh, is there. And in chaste Punjabi, with all the abuse and all, he says, I'm going to be here. And he sends the helicopter back. So there's not, now everybody sees. The GOC is right there. He has sent the helicopter back to Tejpur or wherever he has come from. And now he's on Tagla Ridge telling his men, I'm going to be here. We'll fight to last man with the last bullet we have. And the line immediately firms up. When Patania, who was the commander of some wretched fool, Major General Patania, whose formation broke and ran, because of the leadership, not because of the soldiers. Right? One man comes in, firms up, it stops right there. The Chinese held up. Chinese until then had it easy. They were running all over the place, nothing, no opposition. Immediately it firms up. Harbaksh, one man coming in saying, I'm here. That's what great leaders are. That's what great military leadership is. Staking your life to the position. See, this is where, the strategic melds with the military tactical to create an impression. After Thagla, Chinese could advance. Then they sued for peace because their lines had been stretched. Anyway, the point to make is that we have to marshal our resources better. If you can do it with China, once you have that, then you can create talk of a distinct Indian sphere of influence. Right now, you cannot because you're misspending your resources. You have no sense, you have no forward presence. If you read my book, 2015 book, Why India is Not a Great Power Yet, all this is there. I mentioned why India is not a great power yet. That yet was not supplied by me. It was by my American editor. He said, put a yet there because you are very, very, pessimistic, and I am optimist. And it'll also sell your books. It'll sell more books if you put a yet there because it becomes, oh, okay. If it was a declarative, why India is not a great power, it's a declarative thing. India is the useless movement. If you say yet, okay, there's some hope. Right now, in that book, when we talk about distant presence, that's why I couldn't understand Rawat saying no expeditionary forces. We have to deprioritize no expeditionary forces. Are Baba, that's been a major problem. We have our entire military forces to be expeditionary. Instead, our entire notion is garrison. You just garrison, sit here behind the ramparts, protect yourself somehow, instead of outflanking the enemy at distant reaches. That's why I said I argued then when the Navy was had thought of the Far East Command. That's a great nomenclature to give. The command based in Andaman, calling it the Far East Command. That's a wonderful thing. It shows you ambition. Then there's no. They gave it Andaman Nicobar Command. See how you localize everything? Had you said Far East Command, your intent would have been signaled to everybody around you, including China. And I said, even now I maintain that if you're going to have an aircraft carrier, what good does it do this side of Bay of Bengal? It should be out in China's face in Nha Trang, where the base has been given us by Vietnam. We haven't built up yet. We haven't built up North Mozambican coast that's been given to us for a base, military naval base. We are sort of building up in the north and south Agalega islands in the Maldives, in Mauritius. But we are making haste slowly. What's the point? If you are serious about becoming a great power, having a sphere of influence, and ordering the world in Asia to your advantage, to conform to your interests, how does it help for us not to do these kinds of things? No, otherwise we'll always be riding Western coattails. America comes along, okay, you want a quadrilateral, okay, TK will jump onto that bandwagon. Russia says, no, you want oil, we will give you on concession oil. Oh no, help us, we'll jump onto that. And we think we are being very clever. Okay, you have short-term things, but what is your larger vision? No vision. The vision that you have now articulated, it's a vision of sort which we didn't have. Earlier we had in Nehru's time, and that is the British vision, by the way, incidentally, which was first articulated by General Sir Francis Tucker, who was GOC 4th Division in the Western Desert, the Desert Campaign against Nazi Germany. The great 4th Division that was absolutely devastating. It is the lead division with the first RR Royal Tank Armored, was the first tank RR Squadron, Royal Tank Squadron, you see, under it. It was a tremendous force that was used first by Auchinleck when he was the Middle East commander, CINC Middle East. And then, Montgomery took over, who was an India hater. He didn't like the India division, and he didn't want Indian 4th Division to be in the lead. And then that's when Tucker said, if you don't put this division in the lead against Rommel's forces, I resign. By the way, that's part of history. He threatened to resign. When Montgomery said, oh, okay. And we went into the lead, but still we didn't get the lead campaign, by the way, just so you know. They still played the fool. After we did most of the hard work, after we did most of the hard work, the success of pushing back of Africa Corps, Rommel's Africa Corps, was a secondary thing. The first hard battles were Tobruk, um, with the I'm forgetting the names now. These were fought by the Indian Division, Fourth Division. And Sir Francis Tucker was the one who first talked about India as the central power, as his the Icarian India, Icarus, Icarian India. He said India becomes the focal pivot state for everybody transiting from east to west. Of course, he
Hmm.
thought of it in imperial terms of the antipodes, New Zealand and Australia, and British troops having to reach the antipodes via India. So India becomes the pivotal center. And he conceived of all this and published it in the USI Journal under a nom de plume, Auspex. All of that is there in my nuclear weapons and Indian security, where I developed the entire notion of how Nehru was greatly influenced by Francis Tucker's conception of India as a very pivotal state. So who has done the thinking? It's still Westerners who did the thinking. What we have brought in by way of Vishwaguru is again completely abstract. What does Vishwaguru mean? Which is what I tackled, by the way, in the 2015 book and also the last book, 2018 book. What does Vishwaguru mean? It certainly doesn't. I mean, it doesn't mean more Bharatnatyam troops running around all over the world? Does it mean something more? If it means an Indian hard power, if it has any element of hard power, then it should become evident in your force structuring. But there's no evidence of it. So, new world is going to be a far more difficult world. No one's going to come to your rescue. No one's going to come to anybody's help. You are alone. That's why I've always said, in terms of Atmanirbharta, we still talk about Atmanirbhar means what? I mean, it basically means we are now asking Western companies, instead of the idiot and awful DPSUs, license producing and screwdrivering from CKD and SKD kits, we are now asking those companies to set up shop here and produce the same old hardware. How does it promote Atmanirbharta? And now you have evidence all over the place of what India can do if left to its own devices, if the government trusts our own genius, our own talent, engineering, design, entrepreneurial talent, to give them custom. L&T has an extraordinary, you should see the submarine simulation center in Mumbai. It's world class, first world and beyond. That kind of stuff. It has shipbuilding capability that's lying vacant. When it can produce, it's producing small stuff, patrol boats and all that. When it can produce frigates. Korea produces a frigate in God knows what. I can't now remember. It's a few months. An entirely thing, it built a ship in a few months. I'll have to go back to my notes. You can look it up somewhere. I mean, and we take years together to produce an aircraft carrier and then we crow about it. I mean, our latest aircraft carrier has taken how long? 12, 13 years?
13 years.
Yeah. I mean, it has cost you a bomb. And then it's going to be a sitting duck at the end of all of this. Yeah, it's going to be a sitting duck. So we invest in things without thinking. Why? Because the US Navy has it. So our people who go, the naval brass that travels to the US Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, come back completely taken by naval aviation. So there was once a proposal made for 186 naval aircraft. 186 naval aircraft. So how many carriers would that be? You start with that. So you have, okay, do you want a Nimitz class carrier or now the Ford class CVN, which will be nuclear powered? Okay, then what is the utility ratio here, cost utility ratio? How many aircraft carriers? I mean, USN with all the power it has, all the resources of the world in its hand, US can afford only 13, 12 actually. They'd cut back one. And they won't cut back to 10 because they can't afford it. They can't afford an aircraft carrier. And they are a 350 ship navy. We are a 50 ship navy. 50 ship navy. Combatant navy. Surface fleet, submersibles. 50 capital ships. Aircraft carrier takes away a lot in protection. It needs at least 6 to 7 frigates and missile destroyers and a submarine picket when it moves for protection, for its own protection. What the heck are they going to protect anybody when it needs protection to this extent? So I've argued, Naval Brass doesn't like this argument, but I've made it in all my books. It reduces your ship sea presence in Indian Ocean. It's a vast ocean. You have to have a presence. But what will happen if you have a presence and everything is dedicated to protecting your aircraft carriers? Now you have, say, 3 aircraft carriers that are being planned, 2 now, Vikramaditya and Vikrant. The third will come up, whatever it is. What good will it do if you don't have the resources, right? But you go ahead and buy, This is what happens when we do not adequately think strategically. So, with all these kinds of limitations, how are we going to define which country in Asia will have any confidence in you that you can have a rival sphere of influence, believing in something, with India as a center, as the pivotal power, able to switch forces, political influence left and right? Because we are so central to the Indian Ocean, the only ocean named after us, after a country. Only ocean. And yet we seem not to be aware of what that means. And, the Air Force has its own problems. No strategic bomber. I mean, the other day again, point is that, I raised the problem. Arup Raha was somewhere at something. And I wrote about it in a post in my blog. And then they were quick to say, oh, no, we are still considering it. Arup Raha gave away, they are considering it. But they've been considering it for 15, 20 years now. Leasing the Tu-160 strategic bomber Blackjack. If you have that, you have the strategic reach. Once you have the strategic reach, you have a manned platform, which is recallable. They say, no, but our Agni missiles have a auto-destruct button. Why do you need an auto-destruct button to take out your own Agni 5 mid-course, assuming it's launched wrongly, right? All the missiles have it, by the way. It's not just our missiles. I assume North Koreans too have it. They're not idiots, right? Everybody has it because sometimes things can go wrong. You can launch it and you don't want a destruction of that kind. So you auto-destruct it. You have auto-destruct mechanism. So these kinds of things are all there. Fail-safe methods. But we are not going for strategic bomber, leasing strategic bomber. But you have had the system of leasing weapons from Russia. We're very happy to give it to you. They were happy to give it to you 15 years ago, 20 years ago. We didn't take them. They were happy. We were so unstrategic minded when Russia was breaking, Soviet Union was breaking up. And I wrote about it in my big fat book, Nuclear Weapons and Indian Security. They offered all the scientists and engineers from their choicest, most secret nuclear weapons complexes, the Arasma 16. Do you know that? They offered to India. The Arasma 16, scientists. And we even had shortlisted the scientists we want, the latest, the greatest of the Soviet, because they said we couldn't pay them. And Narasimha Rao was offered that. And our chap said no. Our DRDO chap said no. And our civil bureaucrat said no. You know why? They said the emoluments would be more than what the cabinet secretary makes. This was, by the way, 1996. And what are the emoluments they were talking about? It's laughable. You almost want to cry, really. The terms were that each of these scientists would have would get $200 in hard currency per month. Yeah, $200 in hard currency, but everything, and they get a good sum of money for everyday living here, and you set up their own colony, naturally they'll want to live in their own colony. They love India because sun, they love, sun one and all that. It's a great thing. Everybody wanted, by the way, signed up. You know that? It was sent around to the Arasma 16 personnel. They also, oh, we want to go to India because they saw Goa and those kinds of pictures, sun in a bleak Siberian winters in Arasmas. You have these, India promising you this kind of thing. You had hard currency, $200 in those days, and monthly emoluments that were a little bit more than what the cabinet secretary at that time made, whatever it was, okay? And living quarters. Was that too much? Obviously, yes, because the cabinet secretary said no. That it would upset the civil bureaucracy and it would destabilize this. And Narasimha Rao bought it. We didn't get the best. We could have gotten the best Russian nuclear missile engineers, designers, technicians, everybody for nothing, next to nothing. We didn't get it. Who took them? China. It was first offered to us. China took them all. So we are where we are.
Lack of strategic thoughts, and that's something I think is a.
We are also victims of parochial interests. We are so parochial, bureaucratic. So we are such a bureaucratized state where the highest thing is the bureaucrats who have killed Indian industry. You have killed. I mean, look at what happens when you let Indian industry and Indian entrepreneurs, Indian engineers, Indian talent take off. Skyroot. We have sent a fucking. No, sorry,
No problem.
my language. But we sent off a launcher for low Earth orbital satellites. Skyroot has just launched, right? From ISRO platform, from Launchpad.
Launchpads.
Entirely Indian made space launch vehicle without much ado. While we are making such a world is making such a big thing of Musk setting off his launcher, and we are making nothing. We don't even understand what we have done. A private sector without one iota of taxpayers' money. We are now able to launch low orbital satellites. Can you imagine what we'll do if the government gets out of the defense business? That's why I've said all along, have a real stop to arms imports, not this knuckly stop of people making third-rate goods, antiquated hardware here. Give them incentive. I said profit is good. That's what I've argued at that Chanakya Forum dialogue, whatever it was the other day. It's good. Profit is good. How else will people be incentivized to make these things in the private sector? Who are far better. Profit driven means there's no laxness. There's high productivity, labor productivity. Otherwise, you don't survive in the marketplace if you're not the best. You do not survive. It's not DPSUs wherein you make some wretched thing and you must have heard of the apocryphal stories of the MAN trucks, German MAN trucks that are being built under license from Germany out of Jabalpur, some wretched defense public sector unit. They couldn't start. They had to be pulled by rope from after it was completely assembled. Air Force people will tell you that the Jaguars built at HAL, you had leaky fuel lines coming out of the goddamn assembly line. Leaky fuel lines in an aircraft? A Jaguar built entirely from SKD, CKD kits, mind you. Nothing that you put in by your own, nothing that you did on your own. You merely had to assemble it like Meccano, as I keep saying. When I was young, I used to, I thought I was a great engineer because I could put together, screwed certain Meccano parts together and made a truck or something, which what the DPSUs do. For 70 years, they've done this. And they claim they've built some this, we have built that. We have built nothing. You're screwdrivered. Yeah? There's a difference between designing and building. So when you did the Tejas, shouldn't the services have been the first to say, God, yes. We want nothing else. No imports. We'll lead the charge. No imports. Instead, the Air Force said, no, 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 no. Do you know it's the only aircraft that has been completely developed and built without a single accident? Only aircraft in the world ever, from design stage, no accident.
So that's
So this is the kind of stuff. This is all strategic. It all comes in. And once India makes itself a credible power, the others will find some confidence in. Oh yeah, we can trust this guy because they do things so well. Oh, they build a nuclear powered submarine. Oh, they build their own missiles. Oh, they build their own launch systems. They're all private sector. Oh, wonderful. We'll tie with the private sector. We'll have all the chains, supply chains then running through India for all the ancillary industries that we can set up everywhere else. Right? This is how you tie countries to you. That's how China has done. Southeast Asia has tied up Southeast Asia, including Japan and Germany. Supply chains run from China. That's why when I say that there's no coherence in the Western alliance, it's because Germany cannot afford economically to detach itself from China. Why? Because China buys the most number of the highest value Mercedes Benzes in the world. I mean, God knows how many hundreds of thousands every year are consumed by China. Are you kidding me? They're going to detach because America says so? No, they will heck with you. We don't want NATO. We'll be quite happy. We can do whatever. We want to maintain our lines of communications to China. This is the thing we haven't learned. You set up the entire neighborhood as you're the integrator. You are the integrator. Let L&T set up shop in Indonesia, in Singapore, in Thailand, and all of them, and you integrate the armament system here. And then sell to the world. Indian design Tejas. I said, now begin giving the damn things, not to HAL, give it to Mahindra Aerospace Aviation, whatever the damn thing is called. Or Reliance, they don't have anything, but set them up. They'll set it up tomorrow. If there's enough orders, bulk orders of 100 aircraft. Wow, we'll set up a whole damn thing in 6 months. When you give them incentive, profit is a great incentive, then you can do it. But here the DPSUs, अरे बाबा क्या करेंगे, workforce है, hundreds of millions of people, कुछ करते काम वाम तो करते निकम्मे लोग हैं, पर क्या कर सकते हैं? If that's the attitude of the government, that we have to work out. But who do you think Lockheed first recruited from? The DPSUs, from the HALs. The best were taken by Lockheed and all these people who have set up presence in India. So professionally, they're very good at what they do. They're in a bad milieu where laxness and bad habits are tolerated, manufacturing habits are tolerated. So this is the best. We produce the best even in DPSUs. Our manpower is very good. Our people have micron tolerances in high pressure welding submarines. But they're taken off from Moscow by the foreign companies who have set up shop. But they know they're very good, extremely skilled. But then we don't give them Moscow in Moscow docks. We are producing the Scorpion submarines 12 years too late. I think 3 times over cost. Can market tolerate this kind of nonsense? No. Therefore, L&T says, no, we can't produce it. In my last book, again, I explicated how it is that the DPSUs work, DRDO DPSUs work. They say, Tata, I mentioned a project, a surface-to-air missile project that Tata said we'll produce as a rival to our DPSU, DRDO labs and so on. When the money is first allocated, you know what the DRDO, DPSU gang does? They first buy land and set aside. Then they first build the officers' club with swimming pool. Then they go for the housing. There's no sign of manufacturing, by the way, in all this. The last, and then they keep saying, okay, we have invested so much, now invest some more to actually set up a assembly or a production plant. No, that's how things work here. Well, Tata's got out of the surface to air missile business because they said, okay, they had about, I think, 1 square kilometer space the Tatas gave them. 1 square kilometer, that's all. They had to produce a surface to air missile, entire production plant. And it didn't work out because, and they said, no, we can't produce it in 60 days and so on. They said, okay, it's not economical, scrap it. Do you know? In the free market, there's no tolerance for, uh, you know, um, for the kind of structural inbuilt weaknesses that we have, where people take off when they want, do not work exactly to the specifications. So I'm going off because all these things are connected to the world order. What is the main thing now in the emerging world order? It's supply chains, isn't it? Supply chains. Why is China holding everybody by their balls? Because all the supply chains run through China. Now everybody is now trying to set up alternate supply chains to escape the Chinese clutch. Now, shouldn't we have done this long back? Because we were well positioned to do it. All the Western countries are very happy to make, but we have merely talk about it. Where are the supply chains out of India to supply to Lockheed and Boeing or to British Aerospace? We do minor things here and there, but where are big things for F-35 aircraft, for latest avionics weapon systems? They take our talent, but they don't want our manufacturing capability. So, I mean, I'm always a little, I say bleak things simply because, it's very frustrating. Um, for 30 odd years, you keep saying the things, you write about this, books that are really, everybody reads. In government, they're very aware of what I'm saying, and they all agree, yes, you're right. And people come around and say, sir, we heard you back in 20 years ago, and we are so convinced. I mean, people who rose to very high positions, people who I lectured in Wellington Staff College, then at the higher defense courses, higher command courses at the College of Air Warfare, College of Naval Warfare, Army War College, Mao. All these people come up to me and say, I think, well, why don't you do something when you get into a position of importance and responsibility? Then they shrug their shoulders, sir, you know how it is. No, I don't know how it is. Why can't you be a Harbaksh? Why can't you be a Sagat Singh? Why can't you be a Hanoot Singh? Spectacular commanders who bent the system to their whims because they wanted something out of it. But we don't have the political vision. Our military doesn't. Our military is very much like our civil bureaucracy. Everybody just comes up, seniority, where is the merit? Who has any more experienced war really in real hard terms? And most of the brightest people I know get, rooted out by the time they reach colonel or, wing commander or group captain, air commodore stage. They are pretty much shifted out. All the G Huzuri types keep going up. Why? That's why there's a mechanism that is, shall we say, self-inhibiting in our system, which is, and this is what was said by Galbraith in his ambassador's journal, John Galbraith, who was the US ambassador in the 60s. He said, India is the unique system where the worst comes to the top, where the worst comes to the top, in all aspects of life, in national life. He said, look at politics in India. He said, all the people in the college, in colleges, who are student leaders, all Narabazi and, speechifying and all that, and Gunda types, who muscle and this, that, they get to be, they don't do well in studies, they're intellectual zeros, they can't do anything, but they can win elections. So they're picked up by the political party, they rise up, become political leaders. Okay. The brightest, he said, go off outside the country. That's where they see the future. The not so bright, the next level, join the civil services. This is a lifetime of security, salary aata rehta hai. Little perks here and there. You get a car and you run around. In those days, ambassadors and all that. People are so happy with so little in India. The really enterprising, the really bright people go abroad. Of course, now think what's happening. The very good thing that's happening with the downturn, economic downturn in America, is that the very people in software who are not getting extensions on the H-1B visas are now contemplating India options and taking up Indian jobs being offered by Indian companies. In very good salaries, they say, yes, yeah, very good salaries. What the fuck am I doing here? In America, doing some menial jobs or something. Or I'm waiting for H-1B visas to come along or something. Now they're returning. Shouldn't we incentivize the return? Shouldn't we say that if you attract a person, I mean, why aren't we rating the American faculties for our IIT faculties? Give them a thing that they cannot refuse. That's how the Chinese have done it. Indians, when students, when they go to America, seek to remain in America, by hook or by crook. The Chinese more and more are returning because they're incentivized to return. This is what we should do. And I think the more you end up doing that, but that means the government system has to ease up, right? Entrepreneurship has to be not just talked of in abstract terms. Like the Prime Minister said, business is in my dreams because I'm a Gujarati. Okay, but make it so for everybody. Make everybody seem like a Gujarati in terms of, okay, everybody's entrepreneur. If you see profit, you'll do, and if you reward talent, if you reward innovation, you reward effectiveness and efficiency, what's better? They'll all make their companies, I mean, remarkable. There's one ATV when the nuclear submarine project was going on, the tiles that absorb sound, that are the exterior surfaces of nuclear submarines, nuclear power submarines, are fitted with these tiles, rubberized tiles, and so they went to Russian. They used to rely on Russia at one time until some ATV chief, and I know who Admiral Verma, who was head of ATV at one time. He said at one time, why are we buying? It was very costly. Each tile costs certain amount. And by the way, it's there in my book. I can't remember the numbers now, the figures. But so he said to some guy he put out, he's from Andhra Pradesh or someplace like that, he himself. So some local entrepreneur came up and said, I can make these tiles. So he said, okay, try and make it if you can. This fellow experimented, put in his own money, but with assurance given that if we produce to that standard, we'll buy it and we'll bulk buy. From here on, you supply for all our nuclear submarines, all submarines, diesels also, for sonar, anti-sonar sort of thing. And sure enough, he produced a tile which comes at a fraction of the price of the Russian, which is a fraction of the cost of the Western tile. And he produced it in time, and now he's supplying it for all our submarine forces. A guy who won't, he says, if you see him, a very unprepossessing entrepreneur, in a lungi type character, I mean, no sophistication, nothing, just he knows his business, who does these things. And now he's become rich. Everybody's happy. He produces first class stuff for the submarines, nuclear power submarines. The tiles that surface the exterior are now entirely Indian made because one man was given the chance to do it. Similarly, if the government trusts Indian talent, Indian companies to make it, they'll make it. This is how, in some sense, the new world order, I'm trying to say, is becoming autarkic. Each nation has to become self-sufficient in the most critical items. If you don't do that, you are done for. in the new order. That's the new order. Self sufficient large entities then drawing smaller entities to itself. So these become conglomerations around big centers of power, big countries. A big country then becomes a magnet, like a shoal of fish around a big fish. Similarly, you have this kind of configuration. You have America, you have Europe. In Asia, you have China, and you have India. Japan can never become by itself. It can never become. It's too small, too limited. It can never become. But China can, by proxy through India, become, and they're wanting that. Taiwan too, via India. If we tie up, if we do this, move up fast. We're not doing anything fast. Why isn't the Indian government building up our relations with China, with Taiwan? We are now doing it. Their chip makers are coming in. But by the way, chip making was talked about 15, 20 years ago. And tarried and did nothing. By the way, and this was all said, it's all there again in my last book. It's incredible how criminal this whole thing is. Why we do not consider time a valuable commodity. We lose time. Once you lose time, you lose initiative. Once you lose initiative, you lose the head steam that you may have built up. And the new order then becomes one where you join somebody else's order, not some order you create. Even as the world is becoming autarkic and becoming singular, going off into different power concentrations around big power. So do you want to be another big power, a big power, but wanting to be on someone else's orbit, which is what we are. Right now we are in the American orbit, right? Whether you like it or not, we are trying to think, okay, we still buy some oil from Russia or something like that. But all that is hocus pocus, no? We are trying to maintain some degree of strategic autonomy. But more and more, we seem to think that our future lies with the US and the West. And I don't see how our future can lie with the West, how our interests merge or dovetail with those of the West. So the emerging world order is precisely because look at the kind of cement and glue that our culture, popular culture, not the Bharatanatyam and high culture that some people have in mind. Yeah, the Bollywood, our music, our this, that, it's captured all over from the Caribbean through the Maghreb, through West Asia, to all of Asia. I mean, less in Southeast Asia and all, but still very much there. I was in Cambodia last week. I mean, you see Angkor Wat, everybody there is a Hindu animist. They think of India as motherland in some ways. All the history is connected to India. How we used it? I'm amazed at a lack of vision. And yet we think in small terms. We are in a small game, for small gain. And yet we talk big. What good it does, God knows. I'm pretty much, I'm at the end of, in some sense, you tend to think, well, you get frustrated simply because some basic things don't seem to get done by India. Even as the world is speeding along, go to Singapore, small little piddling little state of no consequence with less population than South Delhi. Or you go to Cambodia, things are so clean and nice. Third world state, manifestly. But nice, clean, things are working there. So this is the kind of stuff. And they are now attracting capital, Chinese capital, albeit, because they want to tie Cambodia and Laos to themselves. And they're attracting Vietnam to China. So the Vietnam is a counterpoise to China that we could have always have exploited. We are beginning to lose that in Southeast Asia. In the Annam Sea, we are losing that. Because Vietnamese more and more see the economic gain they have from attaching themselves to China and the Chinese economic ecosphere. And we're offering no alternatives. That's happening in Central Asia. Yes, all the SEO Central Asian countries, where our culture, our popular culture, is very, very popular. They're tied to us. Everybody sings Indian song, Hindi songs, and jumps around and dances Hindi songs, so on and so forth. We have made no use of it. We don't deliver on our dividend, as I think I remember saying to you. We don't deliver on our promises very well. The Kaladan project that was supposed to foster connectivity between the Ganga Mekong connectivity, remember? First talked about by Jaswant Singh in the Foreign Office 20 years ago. We are still nowhere there. In fact, we have not been able to connect the last mile in Myanmar. Forget about anything more distant in Thailand and Laos and Vietnam. So, short thing is, we may be fated to be a small to middling power, big in size, but that's all we are big in. And big in size cannot be attributed to the people. It's just there, a geographic fact of life. How we use it, we haven't used it yet. So, the new world order for us will be like the old order for us. Will still be a dependency. Will still be living on the kindnesses of other countries. Technology de do baba. Earlier it was PL 480 food grains. Thank God we've gone through that. We're now self-sufficient in food. But 70 years later, we are saying the same thing now. Please give us technology. Please give us this. Please give us that. The Chinese didn't say any of that. We'll reverse engineer everything. We'll produce first generation of perfectly wretched, horrible weapons and hardware. But then we build up our skill sets. We did not, in all this screwdrivering hardware that we have done for 70 years, we never ever set up one reverse engineering outfit to do anything. Do you know that all our HAL aircraft, we have built about 8,000 aircraft engines? And so many airframes, God knows, hundreds, thousands of them. But there's no record of it. Do you know that? We don't keep records. So our knowledge is not cumulative, right? It is episodic. You build this aircraft, next thing comes in, you keep screwdriving. No records kept anywhere. It's almost criminal the way we work. Because we know, the DPSUs know that they'll get the next contract, because the remit of the defense production people in the defense ministry is to keep the DPSUs afloat, no matter how they produce, how wretched they are, ineffective they are, how otherwise inefficient they are in their productivity. It doesn't matter, because they keep getting the government sustenance. Taxpayer upkeeps them. So we seem to be happy with it. So what's there to talk about world order? The new world order for India will be the same world order for us. A new world order is when you can yourself become a player, a big player, not a secondary player, a big player in your own neighborhood to begin with, which means beginning to focus better on who the adversaries are. And we have only one adversary. It should be so simple for us. So simple for us. China is the only adversary. Had we from the very beginning said China, that would have worked out very well for us. Anyway, that's a wide-ranging discussion on everything, including whatever it is, by way of the new global order.